I'm going to go ahead and get started with my presentation up here. I realize that you're continuing to eat, and that is just fine. That's what you came here to do. But we've also squeezed session into our eating time, and so I'm going to go ahead with that. But before I do, I think we need to give thanks and honor to whom honor is due for this special event. Shepherd's Network is an outreach and Harding School of Theology. Several years ago, I can't remember exactly how many years ago, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, Dr. Everett Hufford, Dr. Eddie Randolph, and I met at a church over in Nashville and dreamed about shaping some kind of regularly scheduled events that would allow shepherds to network with each other, to learn from each other, and to be encouraged by helpful presentations. And out of that came Shepherd's Network, that we have hosted several of those in Memphis. This is where most of our events occur. And we've also had one in the Montana area, Belgrade, Montana. Scott Laird with the group up there, with many of the church leaders from that area came together. It was a wonderful event. And then this is our second off-site event. Jimmy and a group of his elders came to one of them that we hosted there in Memphis, and they came back saying, we need to do that for this area. And it has just been a wonderful, wonderful time this weekend, and I know you've benefited from it. So many of you have commented to me that it's good just to get together with other elders and spouses and to realize you're not in this alone, and that you're able to rove minds and hearts with people who deal with the same kinds of things on a regular basis. And it's encouraging to me to see so many of you from this area who have such interest in leading your churches better. And that's exciting. Well, this event could not have been done at all if it weren't for Jimmy Hinton and Cindy Witoski over at the church in Somerset, Pennsylvania. They have worked tirelessly in getting this done. Jimmy and I have had several phone conversations because in terms of off-site events, we're sort of building this plane as we fly it. And he and I and Cindy have had a lot of emails that we've exchanged back and forth and a lot of discussions. But Jimmy, thank you so much for what you have done for Cindy. And in addition to that, the folks here at OVU have been wonderful host and hostess for this event, and they've worked hard to pull this off as well. Kim Haynes, Harold Shank, and probably
Bruce Turner.
So many others of you whose names I probably would not even know that have been a part of this and have allowed us this wonderful facility and the great gathering place to be able to come and do this. Thank you as well. We sure appreciate it. If you have interest in these kinds of things being done, be sure to tell those who organize the events, because it takes a lot to organize an event like this. And it's a labor of love, but it's the kind of labor that once you've done it, if you know people are benefiting from it and appreciating it, it's not hard to do. I mean, it's one in which there's just a lot of energy and trying to get it done and to make sure it goes off well. So hopefully this is just the beginning of so many other things like this that can be done to help with churches. Well, I know you didn't bring your handout with you, but just in case you did, and you're willing to risk getting honey mustard salad dressing on it, you can turn to page 6, because I'll be continuing with my presentation here and giving a little piece of it, and then we'll move on to the other session where I'll close out with the third session. I mentioned to you that there are several perspectives that I think need to be adjusted for established churches to get to the next level. We're now at number 5 of those at the bottom of page 6, and that is with regard to change. And I'm suggesting with regard to change that as a matter of perspective, that established churches need to adopt a way of encouraging proponents with progress, assuring the fearful with boundaries, and guiding all with good process. Now, I want you to think about the logical sequence that is in that. Are you with me there? You're encouraging change proponents in your church with progress. You're assuring the fearful with boundaries. And you're guiding all with good process. Now, with regard to encouraging proponents, change proponents within your church with progress, do you know what I mean by a change proponent or change proponents? They're the people in your church who want things to change. They're the folks who are kind of pushing for things to be a little different. Why do people do that? Let me suggest a few things that usually contribute to people becoming more change-oriented in your church. Not everyone wants it, right? A lot of folks in your church, they love the status quo, they want it to remain that way. But there are some things that can contribute to people wanting things to be different, better, and realizing there's a different, better way of doing things. Let me mention a few of them. Sometimes education, and higher education particularly, has a way of exposing people to a broader world. New and different nuances of topics or concerns or methodologies and ways of doing things. So sometimes the change proponents in your church tend to be, they have a little more education than some. Okay? But it may not be that. It could be travel. Have you ever noticed that as you travel more and you're exposed even perhaps to different countries, to different cultures, to different ways of viewing the world, then you come back to your little neck of the woods and you realize, oh, we're just kind of a little small slice of the pie? Okay? Now, if you put higher education and travel together, then you have people who have a tendency to say, well, you know, I kind of like the slow and stable and steady way that our little community does things, but I've seen some brighter horizons out there, and I kind of like our church to realize a little bit of it. Okay, that can be it. It can be an upsetting life circumstance that rocks your world. I mean, completely rocks your world. And knocks out all props that were there before and forces you to see your life and the lives of everyone around you in a more fragile but at the same time more appreciative way, understanding that the human community is broad and meaningful and that there is an awful lot that can be done to reach others with truth and grace. So sometimes having a really upsetting and difficult circumstance can make you more change-oriented in your life, especially when you put with it travel and education. All right? Then sometimes a significant positive development in your life can make you more change-oriented. When you think about that, let's just suppose that God's been good to you. He's opened up financial and professional opportunities to you in ways that you didn't think you were going to have before. And in so doing, it's exposed you to perspectives and philosophies and other things that before you just weren't aware of. Now, because now you have more options. And you see the world through different eyes. It gives you clearer glasses. Now, that's just a few of the things I could mention that sometimes create a little difference between some people in your church and other people within your church. Or maybe their children go off to college in a different city. Or they get married and they move to a different place. And they go and they visit their children in their children's church and they say, you know, my kids, my adult married kids and their kids really like this church they're a part of, and they're doing some things quite a bit differently than we're doing. It can be any number of things. Now, there's actual science behind this. Mike Armour, many years ago, wrote a book entitled System Sensitive Leadership, where he gives a very thorough explanation of how life complexity and our need to adjust to the complexity, which those two don't always go together. Some people have complex lives, but they don't necessarily feel the need to adjust to all the complexity. That when those two things sort of work together and your world is broadened, it does change the way you view the world. And sometimes you have folks within your churches who are more change-oriented than others. So that's what I mean by change proponents. These are the people who see possibilities that maybe the others in your church don't need to see or don't want to see. Now, these are change proponents. But then you have change opponents. And if you have any change opponents in your churches, you can go ahead and get a little show of hands. Just a little audience participation here. Okay, all right. Why are people change opponents? Well, a variety of reasons why. I won't get into all those, but we know we have those two. Now, change opponents, in many ways, are kind of the stable rock of your church. Not only do they not want things to change, they don't change. They're just always there, and you can count on them. Pretty dependable, loyal, faithful people. I've been going to this church for 55 years, and I've been going to the same Sunday school class for 54 years and 6 months of that time. And Brother Jones has been teaching that Bible class. That young whippersnapper preacher comes in here and teaches one time, and everybody wants him instead of Brother Jones. I'd rather have Brother Jones any day than that young fellow. Are you with me? Okay. Now, they're sort of the stable rock of your church, and you need folks like that. You need both, right? You need people who are proposing change, and to be honest, in order for you to have elders meetings, you need people who oppose the change, right? Okay. So I'm going to say you need to encourage your change proponents with progress, and assure your fearful opponents with some boundaries. Now, how do I mean that? All right. Now, on the next page, page 7, for those of you who have your notes, that's great. I realize not everyone does. Not everyone adjusts to change in the same way. And if you'll see there on page 7, I've made use of Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovation. Now, you've probably seen this bell curve. It's used cross-professionally. I mean, it's used among a number of different professions. And some of you actually may have read Rogers' book, Diffusion of Innovation. It's about that thick. I have never read it. I refused to read it when I saw how thick it was. And I tried to find some really good summaries. So having read the summaries of Everett Rogers' Diffusion of Innovation, you see the chart there. And for those of you who don't see the chart, let me illustrate it. You can look up here as if I have a PowerPoint slide. This is pretend PowerPoint. I want you to imagine a bell curve. You got that? All right. You got about 2.5% of the population, supposedly, that are the innovators. They're down here at that bottom piece. They're the ones who are always thinking outside the box. My perspective is we have only 0.5% of those in the Churches of Christ, and most of them become professors and consultants and presidents of our universities. All right, but supposedly it's a relatively small percentage of our people within culture at large. And then when you can think about, conservative institutions within society, probably even smaller percentage of that people would be the innovators. But it's just to say you've got a very small group of people that are the innovators, the ones who are constantly thinking outside the box. And I have to admit, for most churches, those guys are scary. Okay, they're just a little frightening. They're just a little too much. And, most of them are never appointed as elders, so you guys don't have to worry about whether you have any of them in your group. And if they are preachers, they usually don't last more than a year and a half or 2 years at a place, and they just, eventually become itinerant interim ministers or something like that. This is supposed to be funny. Some of you are catching that. But the 2.5%. Then you have that next group that we call the early adopters, the 13.5%. Now these early adopters are the folks who see the ideas from the innovators And they kind of have this sense of what would work or what they would like to work in their organizations. That's what we mean by early adopters. They see what's happening and they get it pretty quickly. Now, some of these folks in your churches, they're the ones who are always aware of the newest technology that's going to be coming out into their first environment. And they'll experiment with the new. So when Microsoft comes out with something new, they've already got it. They've been tinkering with it for a while, and they really, really like it. Or they really don't like it. And they write a blog review on it. Or, it's not just with technology, it's with any number of things. These are the early adopters. Now, we do have a lot of folks like this in our churches. We do. And it tends to be the people who are more highly educated and more traveled, who have had either really great circumstances in their lives that have sort of elevated their opportunities, or really upsetting circumstances in their lives that have sort of awakened them to some realities that they didn't know before. Those kinds of things have sort of combined in a lot of their lives, and sometimes they're just created by nature. They just naturally think outside the box. And when a lot of people hear them in the church, they say, "Why are you always trying to sound so different?" Well, they're not trying to. They're just being who they are. Okay? I've taken this profile, supposedly it indicates where you are on this scale, and I'm kind of somewhere right there in that little tier between the innovators and the early adopters. I don't try to be different. I really don't. I realize I'm odd, but I don't really try to be different. But I have some people come up to me occasionally and say, when I've preached a sermon, and I've just interpreted the text the way it just looks to me, some people come up to me and say, "That is the most unusual way of seeing that text that I've ever." And then they'll hear several of the sermons and they'll think, "Why are you always trying to sound so different?" I'm not trying to sound different. I'm just being who I am. Okay, now, how many of you in here can identify with that? Got any testimonies? All right, raise your hand. Come on, guys. Give me a little identification here. Thank you. Thank you. All right. At least one at every table. Okay, that's great. Now, you know who these people are in your church. These are your change proponents. Then you have what they call, or what Rogers in his theory called, the early majority, the 34%. These are usually the opinion leaders within your churches. These are the folks that are stable enough to be respected by those who don't want change, but also connected enough to those who do want the change, that everybody sort of looks to them to see how they're responding to things. These are your congregational influencers, for the most part. And you usually do have a percentage of these in elderships. And we have a whole lot of preachers that are in the early majority. A lot of our preachers who probably would be in that category. But then you have, you see that? The late majority. These are the people who are saying, "I don't think it's going to work. These elders, they've had so many false starts, I don't see how they're going to get anything done. They'll just come up with some harebrained idea again." And it's usually that Jim Bob Fred over there. He works over there at that plant where they're always experimenting with stuff, and he comes up with all these crazy ideas, sets them out there, and they'll put out some big plan, say they're going to be doing this. It ain't nothing going to happen. Nothing changed. You just wait and see. It'll be right back where it was before. The preacher get up there and spout off about it. He'll have his little hobby and he'll ride it for a period of time, and he'll be over it. Then we'll go to lectureship, some other Mr. Big preacher come out there and say something else. It'll be another big idea. You know, the pet dog always barks loud. That's the late majority. Okay. Now, if a change goes, they'll say, I'm going to watch and see. I'm just going to see whether or not this happens or not. I don't know yet if I'm with you now, but okay. But they eventually get with it. Usually pretty cooperative, but they could kind of take it or leave it, and they're not really all that excited about what you're doing, but they're not really opposed to what you're doing. You have a lot of people like that in your churches? Okay. That's 34%. Then you have the 16%. They're called the never adopters. Now, in the literature, they're referred to as the laggards. That's a bit derisive in its language, so I'm going to keep from using that. Just so happened that the only little graphic I could find to put in my handout actually referred to them in that way, so I had to use that language. I like never adopters better. It means that they do not want to change anything in their lives. Now, what contributes to that? Well, when we're pastorally sensitive, we have to recognize there are a whole lot of things that can make people that just don't want change. And if people are like that in their lives and they just don't want change, what's the one place they definitely do not want to change? The church. The church. To them, the church is sanctuary away from a swirling, spinning world that is out of control. And when things change, it's upsetting to them, not only personally, it's upsetting to them deeply, existentially. It's upsetting to them. Change is very, very hard for these people. Now, just so happens we have a calling because we are shepherds to minister to them all. But here's the reality. One of the things this helps us to see is that if you wait for everyone to be on board with a change before you make it, you will never make it. You'll never make a change if you're waiting for everyone to be on board. Realizing especially that I think our churches have more than 16% of never adopters. I want to say it's like 76% or something like that. Not quite that bad. But I think it's higher than 16%. I think we have fewer of the innovators and more of the never adopters. Religious institutions, especially conservative religious institutions, by nature attract more people like that. Now, let's just say, to round it off, that 20% of a typical mainstream Church of Christ is never adopters. Let's say you've got a church of 200. How many people is 20%? Simple math. 40 people, right? And they all go to the same Bible class in your church, right? Well, Brother Jim Bob Fred's been teaching that course for all these years, and he's been using that Gospel Advocate Adult Quarterly and the King James Bible. Not that there's anything wrong. I may have stepped on somebody's toes here. Not that there's anything wrong with that Gospel Advocate Quarterly. Amen. Praise the Lord. Yes, sir. And old King Jimmy, boy, he did us a good turn, didn't he? Created that beautiful Bible. Okay, all right. Yes. All right, but they do tend to congregate. So you got a church of 100, you got 20 of those people. All right. They can create a pretty significant, block of influence within the congregation. So the idea that I'm trying to set forth is, though, that you have this range of people relative to change, to innovation that occurs, and that we have to do what we can to encourage the proponents with progress, because in a lot of sense, they're sort of the new life. They're the new breath that is breathed within our churches. But then you also have to realize that these other people, it's church for them too. And this has to be a place of faith for all. That's what's leading a lot of our churches to create different venues within their congregations. I realize some of you may have seen that happening, and I'm not suggesting one way or the other, but it's part of what motivates many of our churches to have options. We got one contemporary service and one traditional service. It's part of what motivates this. It's an attempt to try to respond to the faith needs of these who are at various places along the innovation continuum. Okay. Now, I've documented a few sources at the bottom if you're interested in the idea of doing what you can to encourage change proponents that some things will change and to assure the fearful with boundaries. But principally, this is one of the things that does indeed have to occur. So when you say encourage change proponents, it means listen to them. Respond to their ideas. Help them develop their ideas so that it turns out to be something that could potentially be really good for the church. That's an important thing to do. These people have to be nurtured and shepherded too. And sometimes a good thing to do is to work with them and listen to them to where you help them shape their ideas, advance their ideas to the place where it can be something that is useful for the congregation. Maybe you then can be one of these early adopters, or maybe even sort of on the border of that late adopter category, to where you're able to see an element within the ideas that that's good, that's useful, that's helpful. And to be able to nurture these people and to help them see that they have a place within your congregation, but at the same time to realize that with every change, usually there are some things that are going to stay the same. Not everything changes. And at times what we have to do when we are incorporating change is also to give the fearful some sense of boundaries that there's some things that will remain the same. Now, I've seen several examples of that in congregational life, and probably you have too. I'm actually borrowing terminology here from David Weitzel, where he talks about change boundaries. And if you'd like to do more reading on this, because I know this is something that is of special interest, if you'll see at the bottom of the page, I've listed there, number 7, footnote number 7, for those of you who are reading. For insight into empowering change proponents without alienating tradition bearers. David Weitzel's book, Staying Power. Why People Leave the Church Over Change and What You Can Do About It. His process is a bit overly technical, and the part on generational preferences is a bit dated, but the overall change principles are really helpful in that text. And then also he has written another one, if you'll see there in footnote 9, same author, David Weitzel. For some good ideas on expressing change boundaries, see David Weitzel, Preparing for Change Reaction. The examples and process details are not as important as the general principle of change boundaries that he expresses in that book. Very, very fine. Very fine. All right. Now, along these lines, there has to be good process. You're encouraging proponents with positive momentum. You're encouraging the fearful with boundaries. But then, connected to this, guiding all with good process. Now, I love talking about change process. I really do. It's a whole lot longer than we have time to get into. But let me suggest that relative to change in church, there are 3 types of satisfaction that have to occur. And usually, if you keep in mind these 3 P's of satisfaction relative to change, and continually let them govern what you do, you'll probably be in pretty good shape. These 3 types of satisfaction among your members. Personal satisfaction, process satisfaction, and product satisfaction. Personal, process, and product satisfaction. Now let me read you briefly what I have there at the bottom of the page on page 7. Change efforts must achieve 3 levels of satisfaction. Personal. All persons involved believe their interests have been heard and respected. Number 2, process. The process reflects fairness, good timing, and due diligence. In other words, you didn't go off half-cocked. Number 3, product. The decision or the actual change meets the widely perceived need and is well executed. All right. Along those lines, tucked into one of Larry Osborne's books, Sticky Teams, he encourages that I have listed there on page 8 a 4-step process of change diplomacy. Now, Osborne writes a little bit differently than some church guys. Osborne writes out of actual experience, where he's actually done a lot of change in his church, which is a very conservative, Bible-believing sort of background. And he talks about this 4-step process of change diplomacy. I'll read and comment on this, and then we'll be done for this section. He suggests you need to go through these 4 steps anytime you're thinking about change in a church. Number 1, test the waters. Test the waters. He says, early in the change process, run the idea by a few fellow elders, staff, unofficial power brokers, and regular folks to get their input. Do this in informal settings with free-flowing and easy conversation. You're not looking here for buy-in, permission, or coalition building, but simply a quick read on people's initial reactions. How many of you have ever done the DISC profile? Any of you in here done the DISC profile? I encourage all church leaders to have team building where they do the DISC profile. I do the DISC profile, tons of it, all the time. So does Dr. Hufford. I've got a website on it, discpersonalitysource.com, where you can go and you can get it and read about it. I'm a strong believer in it. Even better than Myers-Briggs. It's simpler to understand than Myers-Briggs, and in my opinion, strikes more at our normal behaviors. Myers-Briggs is a deep-seated personality inventory based on Jungian personality type that is honestly getting a lot of bad press from psychologists these days as to its accuracy and that sort of thing. And it's quickly being replaced by what's called a 5 personality model. So I love Myers-Briggs, but it's very complex. If you've ever taken it, I would wonder whether you can remember your letters, and especially be able to explain what they mean. I'm certified with Myers-Briggs, so I'm a Myers-Briggs geek. I like it. So when I say I'm an ENTJ, it makes a lot of sense to me, and I know how to explain that to people. And I know the difference between that and somebody who's an ISFP or something like that. DISC, however, is much easier to understand. You got dominant, influencing, steady, and conscientious behavioral types. And it measures surface behaviors, which means that if you take it with your marriage in mind, you may have a different read. You take it with your church relationships in mind, you may have a different score, because it's contextual, and it's very, very good. Now, when you test the waters with a high C, conscientious, cautious, analytical, you can always expect that automatically they notice what's wrong with it. That's just who they are. That's just who they're not. Robert Rome does a lot of training with this, with personality insights. He has this little mantra where he says, people usually don't do what they do against you, they do it for themselves. They're just doing it because that's who they are. So somebody who's a high C, conscientious, cautious, analytical, when you share a new idea with them, you have to expect they're going to pick it apart. Because that's the contribution God has wired them to make, to be honest. You share it with somebody who's a high S, sensitive, kind, careful, very quiet. They're usually going to be wondering how it's going to impact people they love. But you get that from them. You share it with a high I, an influencer, gregarious, outgoing person, they're automatically going to start thinking about who all they know who's already doing it. And back in their minds, they're going to be thinking, do you need my help? Can I do something? I'll be glad to promote this for you. Let me take it to the next level. In fact, it'd probably be better if I was the one who took it to the next level. I probably do that a little better than you and some of the other people that are out there. You know, high I's just know they have this incredible influential verbal skill. And they're just really good with it. But anytime you share an idea with an I, you just have to expect they're going to talk a lot. And loudly. And laugh. At the same time. And probably share it with other people you didn't want them to share it with. And so you just have to be careful when you share it with I's. Okay? D's, the dominant, demanding, determined, decisive doers, are going to cut to the chase and say, okay, tell me how it's going to get done. What are we going to do? When are we going to do it? And they've got quick questions. Don't do small talk with them. Share your idea. Bow, scrape, kneel, state your business. It's not quite that bad, but you know, there's enough of it there. I was once working at a church where they had 3 secretaries. And I was the preacher, quote unquote senior minister, whatever you want to call it. And for my birthday once, I got a Garfield sticker from the secretaries that literally said, bow, scrape, kneel, state your business. What are they trying to tell me here? Okay. Test the waters, though. Test the water. And realize that the persons with whom you share your ideas are going to give you reactions according to who they are. And that's a good thing. Then he says, when you do this, this tells you whether your dissatisfaction with the status quo is shared by others and identifies which changes not to make and identifies where the strongest support and resistance is likely to come. You've sort of tested the idea to see. I often say to people who are considering a change, who wants the change? Who wants it? Why do we need to make this change, and who says so? That's a very important question to raise. Because if you don't have enough people who want to change, you might not have enough momentum to pull it off. And you may have to do some creating a sense of need, which usually precedes a lot of change. In fact, most of the time, where ministers and church leaders have to spend the bulk of their time is creating a sense of urgency for the change. And using the power of the pulpit or their influence with people to say, this is something we really need to be thinking about. And you have to gently do that. And so sometimes what precedes testing the waters, or maybe what follows it, is realizing you got to create a sense of urgency. George Bullard, who was a strategist for many years among the Southern Baptists and now works with an organization called the Columbia Partnership, which is designed to help Protestant churches revitalize, has written an awful lot about change, and he talks about how important it is to talk about good ways of building urgency and bad ways of building urgency. And there are good and bad ways to do that. Letter B, listen and respond to the resistors. Testing the water, but then number 2, listening and responding to resistors. Do not see resistors as enemies to overcome, but as advisors to help turn a good idea into a great idea by helping you see the weaknesses and hidden defects, perhaps saving you from lots of unnecessary mid-course corrections. Letter 3, or number 3 here, sell your ideas to individuals before groups. Before bringing a new idea or proposed change to the congregation, always have some strong supporters lined up. Select people who are early adopter or early majority types who are respected in the congregation. This gives your ideas instant credibility, and most people do not adopt a major change until they know who else is for it. And then number 4, lastly, lead boldly. Once you have done the first 3 steps, are prayerfully convinced it is God's will and God's timing, have counted the cost and determined the hill is worth charging, and are committed to staying long enough to see the change through, step up and lead, putting forth your strongest ethical, persuasive efforts. Without bold leadership, nothing will get done. Inertia will rule. Those who let a few upset people, be they staff, board, or congregational members, he says, put a halt to much-needed changes, end up with a ministry that resembles a bus with 1 accelerator and 60 sets of brakes. Cool, that was hard to hear, but he's right. 1 accelerator and 60 sets of brakes. All right. So Larry Osborne, some good stuff there. It comes from his book, Sticky Teams, where he talks about the 4-step process of change diplomacy. Honestly, guys, this is just good homespun wisdom, where Osborne has lived it out and has seen these kinds of things. And I think it's a really good piece. I think it's a very fine piece. Now, I'm not going to have anything more to say about the change piece because there are other things that I want to move on to, but I did want to cover that while we were here and eating our meal. You've been very attentive and very kind. I appreciate it. Just the way we structured things. We were doing some presentations during the dinner hour. You're not done with me. I've still got another hour with you. So move down there for more punishment. Okay, good. Great. I'll see you guys down there.